store. It's like they got all these skeletons in their closets. Joel, you don't know what I've done in my past. You don't know what I've been through. They internalize all the guilt, the shame, the blame. But you need to understand, when you came to Christ, when you received his forgiveness, God cleaned out all of your closets.
Right.
He doesn't remember your mistakes,
He
your
doesn't
sins,
remember.
your failures.
You forget too.
My question is, why don't you quit remembering it?
Ah.
Why don't you quit listening to the
Told
voice of the accuser? I love the story Jesus told about the prodigal son. This young man made a lot of mistakes. He told his dad that he wanted his share of the inheritance, his money. He left home and went out and lived a wild life, partied all the time. And eventually, those poor choices caught up to him. The money ran out. He didn't have anything to eat, any place to stay. And he ended up working in a hog pen, feeding the hogs. He got so low, so desperate, he had to eat the hog food just to stay alive. I mean, he had hit rock bottom. But one day, sitting in that filth and shame, he said to himself, I will arise and go back to my father's. Best decision that he ever made. When you make mistakes, when you go through failures and disappointments, don't sit around in self-pity. Don't go month after month condemning yourself, rejecting yourself. The first step to victory is to get back up again and go back to your father's. This young man headed home. I'm sure in the back of his mind, he thought, I'm just wasting my time. My father's never going to receive me back. He's going to be so put out with me. I've made so many terrible choices. I can imagine he tried to talk himself out of it 3 or 4 times along the way, telling himself, I'm such a failure. My father will never forgive me. But the scripture says, when the father saw him a long way off, that tells me the father must have been looking for him. The father must have gotten up early every morning and said to himself, maybe today will be the day my son comes back home. Morning, noon, and night, the father was on the lookout. When he saw his son, he took off running toward him. Couldn't wait to see him. This is the only picture of God running in the Bible. What's God running to? One of the disciples? One of the apostles? God's not running to a famous religious leader. He's running to a young man that needs mercy. He's running to a person that's made mistakes, a person that's failed. When the father got there, he embraced his son. He hugged him. I can imagine he spun him around a couple of times. He was so happy to see him. But the son, he just hung his head in shame. The accuser was working overtime on him. He said, Dad, I've really blown it, made some terrible decisions, and I know I don't deserve any of this, but maybe you can just take me back as one of your hired servants. I'll work out in the fields for you. The father would have nothing to do with that. He said, what are you talking about? Are you kidding? You're my son. And some of you today, you think that God could never forgive you. You've made too many mistakes, blown it too many times. But let me assure you, nothing that you've done is too much for the mercy of God. And God is not looking to condemn you. He's not looking to chew you out like this young man. He stands before you with his arms held open wide. He's looking way down the road. And the moment you take one step toward him, God will come running towards you. Why don't you come back home today? Some of you have been away for a long time, living guilty and condemned, feeling like God could never make anything out of your life, feeling like he could never use you. But no, today can be a new beginning. God has mercy for any mistake that we've ever made. The father said to one of his servants, go get the best robe and put it on my son. One translation says, put the robe of honor on him. And if you could just receive that today, you may have made mistakes, gone through setbacks, but God doesn't just want to restore you. He doesn't just want to give you a new beginning. He wants to put the robe of honor on you. That's just the way our